We're going to go ahead and get it done. And I'll give everyone a few updates on what I have planned for tomorrow in just a few moments. And then I'll explain kind of the genesis for tonight's live stream. Of course, as you know, Part 4, Part 5, Part 6 are always ready to go. But this one came about as a result of recent interactions between me and an individual I've known, off and on in different Trinitarian and non-Trinitarian circles for over 2 decades, I would say. At least close to 2 decades. Since this individual has been around at least back to the days of my debate with Dr. White. And he's associated with Dr. White's ministry, or was at one time, and frequents different discussions involving the Trinity. Seems to show up when I'm involved as well, which isn't a surprise, as I said, because a lot of us who've been involved in apologetics or discussions, debates about the Trinity, biblical theology, Christology, and related stuff, right? NWT, translation differences. We run into each other here and there. And so it's not uncommon to find, for me to find anyway, someone whom I've encountered before. So this series is really about, as the title states, calling out all Trinitarian scholars and apologetic cultists. The apologists that like to run around and build up their followings, not necessarily stating that the individual we'll be discussing this evening is trying to build a following. But we know some of the apologetic nuts out there who definitely seem to be like that. So I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm not going to allow the Trinitarians to continue this abuse. And that's what it is. It's abuse. It's abuse not just of the biblical text, of the biblical God, of the biblical Christ. It's abuse of people who are trying to follow them. And of course, as we know, Trinitarian scholars and apologists think they follow the Bible, right? I mean, that's their whole deal. They do, we don't. We argue about it sometimes. But sometimes it's not really an argument. It's a waste of time. Why? Because they don't present any credible arguments. And yet they waste our time. As if they do have arguments for us to take our time. We're all busy people, right? Trinitarians are busy. Apologetic cultists are nuts, right? The people who make trouble for us, they have lives just like we do, right? I don't just sit here all day and argue with people. I work full time, right? I'm back in school as well. I haven't mentioned that to anyone because I'm just getting my degree done that, as I told Dr. Mori in my debate, I hadn't completed yet. But now I have time to go back to school and work on it. So I'm trying to get things done personally in that way. I don't need to do it. I just want to. And now that I don't have all of my kids here with me at home, I have more time to pursue certain things like secular education, where it fits in with my schedule. So I'm busy. Right? I'm busy with the videos. I got my work. I still have a family, still have kids. So we're all busy is what I'm getting at. Even the people who argue with us about the Trinity. So when we take time, or when we pursue other people and take their time, it's got to be worth it, right? It should be worth it. I insist that it is worth it because we have wasted so much time. And it wasn't worth it. Some of it was worth it. We did some good work. Trinitarians have done some good work. Not all of the things we've done in arguing and debating have been a waste of time. But often it is. And do we really have that kind of time? I just kind of described how I don't. I mean, I make the time, right? We kind of have to make the time when we're challenged on some of our fundamental beliefs and issues because we're told that, right? Does not Peter tell us to be prepared to make a defense? So we're obligated in that sense. But not all the time. We don't have to continuously rob our schedules of time just so we can run over and respond to someone who, as you're going to see in just a moment, didn't even take the time to review the sources in question. Didn't even bother to contact Dr. White or anyone else in the apologetic circles that this individual dwells and say, hey, I got Stafford over here, right? He wrote this article 10 years ago. He talked to you about you in it. You know, we've kind of been ignoring it, but now it's a big issue. And so what's going on here? What's going on with Pliny and Martin and the early Christian view of God or a God with regard to Jesus? Didn't even take the time to do that. So to me, as I believe you'll see, they're wasting our time. And while I'm more than happy to present information, get into discussions, talk about the issues, I think I've shown that by now. When someone doesn't take the time to study the issue, at least to be able to say, hey, Greg, you know, that issue you made out of Pliny and Trajan and the early Christians and your 10-year-old blog article on Dr. White and assumptions of Trinitarianism, you know, I took a look at that and here's what I think. No, not even that. And yet, we spent a lot of time talking about it anyway. So, what exactly is going on? Right. What are we addressing when it comes to an individual related to or associated with a lot of apologetic groups, Trinitarian scholars, and in his own right has been involved with this stuff for a long time? I'm talking about Jeff Downs, someone who has, as I said, been around. And I, always felt good about in terms of just, him as a person. I never felt, even though Jeff did say that I'd be destroyed for not believing in the Trinity, something like that. And I did then follow up and tell him to enjoy the end of Trinitarianism. This was 6 months to a year ago. I can look it up. And of course I followed up with my end of Trinitarianism video. And that's different than saying someone's going to be destroyed, right? But, even that, I didn't take it from Jeff in a way that was like, I just don't get the feeling Jeff is a mean person. I never have. We've disagreed. He's made comments like that to me. But even that comment, right? I mean, non-Trinitarians will also say at times that, at least in some ways, that we believe Trinitarians who are not listening, who are intentionally misleading, they're probably not going to make it, right? We hope they make it. I said it in my last video in this series that we actually care about the Trinitarians. At least I do. And I'm sure Jeff cares about me too. I kind of get that feeling. I don't feel like Jeff is, well, like some other people I don't need to mention thumbnails. But like some other apologetic nuts who clearly hate our guts, or at least speak of us as if we're from the pit of hell. It's their words. It's kind of hard to take that in a positive light. And that's really the nice side of some of the comments by that individual and others like him. So I just don't see Jeff Downs as a person like that. I actually feel like he's trying to help people who don't, he doesn't think are believing the right things. And obviously he believes in the Trinity, so he doesn't like the way that I go about dealing with it. I mean, he's not necessarily saying he doesn't like, but you can tell he's disagreeing. He has a right to do that. And so I look at it in that light. I understand he's a believer. He's associated with a lot of Trinitarian scholars and apologists and is one himself. And so I don't look at it as unusual, his comments and the way he acts when we engage. I don't get the feeling he's a mean-spirited person. My concern about Mr. Downs is he's not listening. He's not taking the time to find out. It doesn't mean he doesn't research. He does. That's what's so interesting. He clearly knows how to find things out. But when it comes to what we're talking about, he chose not to do that. He chose, as you're going to see in just a moment, to come to my Facebook page, CWJ Facebook page, and start talking about something that I posted a video about. So it becomes a problem in that respect because I end up then having to repeat myself, right? And talk to, in this case, Jeff, about something he could have just found out about on his own and then come and ask me a question about it, rather than me have to deal with him from the position of, well, you just said you haven't really read this material, and yet here you are. You want to talk about it. Okay. Well, let's talk about it. Let's go ahead and see what Jeff had to say, at least in terms of this issue involving Pliny. And as you know, I recently did a video as the second part of our early Christian views of Jesus series, where I talked about Pliny's letter to Trajan, 112 AD, and how it shows clearly in the context of the reading of that letter. I'll put a link to the video below if it's not there already. There's no way that Pliny could have been referring to God, capital G-O-D, in a Trinitarian sense. And the only real way you could make sense of what Pliny wrote to Trajan after torturing the Christians to get their view from them, he didn't write anything about a person of the Trinity or the Trinity. He didn't say anything about they're worshiping these three persons in this divine essence and they're all co-equal and they seem like the gods, but it's like this triunity God. And no, nothing like that at all. And yet, as I showed in that video, Ralph P. Martin, a well-known, right, this is not an obscure person. This book has been reprinted many times. It's widely available. And it's been out for many years, since the early 80s at least. So while I don't expect everyone to have read it, it's pretty much, in Trinitarian circles, I would say, one of the standard works when it comes to early Christology. I explain from that book, like I quote from that book, in my article that I showed in the Pliny video 10 years ago, And a follow-up response to Dr. White and Dr. Moore too, but it was mainly Dr. White and the assumptions of Trinitarianism and his claim that I'm assuming my view related to our 2003 debate. I quoted that book in that article so that anyone could just look it up, and see if what I quoted was correct. I also quoted this book. This is another, it's a book with multiple articles in it, but it's very well known, Kyrios Christos. It's, really one of the standard works, again, on early beliefs in Jesus among Trinitarians and non, right? I mean, I have it. It was printed in 1970. It's been around a long time. And it has articles in it, like the one I quoted in my Assumptions of Trinitarianism article, written by Martin, where he does the same thing, and even in a worse sense, I argue, by expressly tying Pliny's reference to the early Christians' view to Trinitarianism. By mistranslating and misrepresenting Pliny's view of the early Christians under torture as singing hymns to Christ as to God, capital G-O-D. And I showed in that Pliny video how various apologetic nut groups have taken, either on their own or from Martin or from other Trinitarians' writings, but I focused on Martin because he's very well known, and they expressly tie Pliny's comment about the early Christian view of Jesus to Trinitarianism, to Nicaea. And yet, as I was mentioning, the context of Pliny's letter explicitly forbids it. Right? He talks about bringing statues of the gods, making them honor the gods several times. So he didn't have any understanding of God, capital G-O-D, or the Trinity. He represented the early Christian view, which is our view too, and the view in texts like John 1:1, John 10, 29 through 36, where Jesus is accused of being theos, responds by using a text that calls the other sons of God theoi, gods. Pliny reports to Trajan that the early Christians had the view of Jesus as a god. And true, it's in the context of him understanding many as gods. But he understood their explanation under torture, no less, and execution, to be that of a god. He didn't come away with it and suggest that there's this special kind of deity, this triunity, or that Jesus is in any way the highest divinity. Maybe he misunderstood him, but I accept that. I explained that. But that's not what he wrote. Okay, so we can't just start taking liberties because we think he might have thought this or that. Look at the context of his letter and look at what he wrote. He clearly understood the Christians to mean they were singing hymns to Christ as to a god. Right or wrong, that's how he understood it. So that's how his view of the early Christian view should be presented. Am I wrong? Is that bad? Am I wrong for thinking that it's the right thing to do to correctly express someone's view, when we can show that's what he had to mean, at least in the sense of a Roman god, or a god nonetheless, as the Christians explained? Because that's what he said. So when I discuss how Martin and others are misusing that text, and I explain how that shows the same thing that is at work when the Trinitarians get to the biblical text, we can do one of two things, right? We can accept that Trinitarians to this point, and not all of them, and this comes up in the post I'm going to show you in a moment. I made it explicit in that same video on Pliny's letter to Trajan that Lightfoot, a Trinitarian, correctly quotes Pliny's letter to Trajan as referring to Jesus as a god, and that Martin correctly quotes Lightfoot's correct quote in his introduction. But for some unexplained reason, several pages later in the same introduction, Martin changes it. He doesn't explain why. He doesn't get into Pliny in the letter and say, well, this has to be capital G-O-D because, Trinity. No. And then he does it again. Or he did it in another place in the Kyrios Christos article I referenced. So we either have to accept that Martin and all Trinitarians since him or before him who have misquoted and misrepresented Pliny's letter to Trajan in that respect must be corrected. Or you must defend what they say or write about it. There's one or the other, right? So I have never stated all Trinitarians misrepresent Pliny when he writes to Trajan about the early Christian view of Jesus as a God. I've never said that. And in fact, in the very video that Mr. Downs commented on, I made it clear, as I just said, that Lightfoot quoted it correctly, and that even Martin quoted it initially correctly. So the evidence in the video Mr. Downs posted on, as you're going to see, and we assume, I hope correctly, he watched, made clear my position here. And yet, as you're going to see, Mr. Downs didn't get it and used it as a basis to criticize me about it. I have said, and I do say, and I maintain to this day, all Trinitarians are in fact misusing the word God when it gets to the Bible. There's no doubt about that. And I used Pliny's letter to show exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, we show it in the Bible over and over again, but I used Pliny to show it in a way that's really not disputable, right? Because you can't argue that Pliny is using it in a Trinitarian sense based on the context of what he writes to Trajan and the gods that he accepts. He doesn't show any understanding or awareness of anything but those kinds of gods, individual gods. And so that's how he associated their view of Jesus as an individual God, a god. He doesn't talk about anything else that they may have said or that would have caused him to think of Jesus differently than a god. So, but I never have said all Trinitarians misuse Pliny. And in fact, I gave Lightfoot credit for not doing that. And yet I was criticized anyway. Well, let's take a look here at why I say that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to full screen this for a moment so you can see it very clearly. This is Mr. Downs posting several days ago on the video about Pliny and the early Christian view of Jesus. Let's look at what he says. This is also part of the thumbnail for this video. So we're going to start here. You seem to lump all Trinitarians as dishonest here. Again, you may and do disagree with our Trinitarianism, but not all Trinitarians use Pliny as supporting our view. I never said that. I never said that, Jeff. I never said it in the video. I've never said it anywhere else. So right out of the gate, I saw that and it's like, exactly how do I approach this here? Well, as I mentioned at the start, I've never felt badly towards Jeff. So I tried to approach it, with an open mind. I do get into the issue I'm highlighting right now, but, I figured Jeff just was responding as a Trinitarian and defending his belief in a way that I had to just deal with and try to make him understand what was going on. But I've never said all Trinitarians use Pliny as supporting your view. In fact, once again, if you just watch that video that you posted the comment to, you'll see me giving credit to a Trinitarian for not using Pliny as supporting your view. Let's go back to what Jeff had to say. I've never seen this in all my readings. He's talking about Pliny's letter to Trajan, or at least Martin's citation of Pliny with the capital God. I grant that I may have missed it. I do not have Martin's work. I trust you are using the source correctly. Fair enough, Jeff. I appreciate that you give me the credit to trust I'm using the source correctly. But I'm going to ask you not to do that. I appreciate it. But I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to trust me on the source. I don't want you to trust anybody, Jeff. I want you to look up the source. I want you to read it and verify what it says. And then if I'm not correct, tell me where I'm wrong. Right? I mean, even though this work is very widely available and has been for a long time, I get it. Not everybody reads everything. I get it. But not everybody comments on things they haven't read. And if you're not going to look up the source, and you're not going to read the text, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to handle you in terms of the discussion? I mean, you're here, posting on my CWJ Facebook page. You clearly want to talk about it. You're defending Trinitarians by stating that they don't all use Pliny as supporting your view, which I never said. But you've never even seen this work, or either Martin's or Pliny's work, either one or both, because you refer to both here. And you state you don't have Martin's work, that's fine. But I'm not sure if you're talking about Pliny's reference and or Martin, or just one of them. But either way, it doesn't matter. Right? Because if you've seen Pliny's work in a way and you did accept it, then you didn't look it up to find out if it was correct. But you're calling me out here on something I'd never claimed on a video where I'm discussing a text you've never read and that you're not willing to look up in order to really, properly engage this stuff. And you're not, Jeff, you're not someone who's just like brand new in this, That's why I said at the start, you've been around a while. You're familiar with Dr. White. I mean, you're not unattached to people that can give you information on this level, photocopy a page, send you a book, verify the quote. I mean, this is not asking too much. No, that's not. But you're asking me too much when you do this. Right? You're burdening me from the things I need to do when you haven't even done the things that you should do or could do, or certainly have someone help you with. Let's go back to what was written. Here's what I said in partial response. Now, there's several posts. We're going to read several of them. And so I wrote below, fair enough. But can you show me one, just one, Trinitarian who corrected the others who are misusing Pliny? If you can show me one single Trinitarian, who ever did what I did and said, wait a minute, this is not right. This could not possibly mean God like we mean, since Pliny was not one of us and, in fact, believed in multiple gods. I'd like to see it. So what I'm asking here is for Jeff to show me someone, a Trinitarian, whoever noticed Martin's misquotation and misuse of Pliny, or any of the apologetic nuts that I showed in the Pliny video, that saw that and then instead of, captioning it in association with the beliefs of Nicaea, said, wait a minute, that's not correct. This can't mean God, capital G-O-D. I mean, yeah, we're Trinitarians, but not Pliny. So we need to represent Pliny here correctly like Lightfoot did. And like Martin did in his first quotation, when he quoted Lightfoot, who did. And then I said, if you can't do this, Jeff, what does it say about the willingness of Trinitarians to correct error from their own when it is, well, pretty obvious, right? This is not a hard thing to figure out, everybody. This isn't a tough one. This isn't, count nouns and mass nouns and qualitative stuff in John 1:1, which is a joke anyway, right? In terms of how they proceed about it, but far more complex, right? Or Sharp's rule, stuff like that. No. This is the easy stuff. This is a known pagan, Roman, a known letter. Right? It's like one of our earliest post-biblical representations of Christianity. This is a big one in terms of like, everyone should kind of know this. It's not complex, right? Is the word God capital G-O-D or is it a God? It's kind of like a John 1:1, but not the complex stuff, right? Because it's Pliny. Why hasn't this happened? Right? We have some Trinitarians quoting it correctly. And Jeff even went to the trouble, and I give you credit for that, Jeff. I let your link stand until you did something later that we'll talk about next. But Jeff went and he found an article online that discusses, Philippians 2 and kind of an outline and some of the substantive material. And in that article, it showed the author references Pliny correctly. And he just cites it. He cites the reference from Pliny that he referred to the Christian view of Jesus as singing hymns as to a God. Doesn't say anything else. Right? The paper that Jeff linked didn't correct Martin. Didn't get into whether Pliny meant God, capital G-O-D. Just quoted it correctly. Like Lightfoot. That's not what I'm talking about. I already acknowledged that. I'm asking, where is the Trinitarian scholar or apologetic person who actually took a stand and said, you know, I like the way that looks. I like the way that Martin put that next and used capital G-O-D there. That looks better than a God. But it's not correct. It's incorrect. We can't be promoting error. We're Trinitarians. We're the scholars. We're the apologists, right? We defend what's right. Isn't that how you view yourselves? Seems like that's how you kind of view yourselves. So what's happening here? Why isn't it happening here? I'd like to see that. If you can't do this, Jeff, what does it say about the willingness of Trinitarians to correct their own error when it is, well, pretty obvious? I don't think you can. So all this time, and it took me to correct this, I find that very, very troubling for your side. And so I'm basically calling him out here, right? I'm challenging him. Okay, Jeff. Well, so you're calling me out for calling out Trinitarians misusing Pliny. You haven't read it. You haven't read Martin's work. You've never come across it. Can you show me one Trinitarian who stood up and said, hey, I like the way that sounds or whatever? We can't do that. We shouldn't be doing that. We don't need to do that. I don't think he can. I don't think any Trinitarian can. It's not just Jeff. It's just that Jeff chose to comment on the video. He chose to stand up and try to defend, right, what I didn't claim, namely that all Trinitarians misuse Pliny on this point. But if he's going to do that, right, he's going to take a stand. All right. So where's the Trinitarian who took a stand like I did to try to point out an error that I believe reflects the rest of the errors you're making with the New Testament, the biblical use of God? Where's the Trinitarian that could take this kind of easy correction? This is a kind of an easy one here if you take the time and you really care, right? Because again, it's not like a big translation issue. It's not even a hard contextual issue. It's just a read and tell people what it says issue. And if we can't do that, my friends, I'm not sure we really should be talking about this subject at all, right? If you can't even correct this source, what's the point of getting caught up in all these other texts and trying to figure them out? Right? Shouldn't we start with the easiest one and then work our way forward and try to get as close to accuracy as we can? I think so. So, Jeff had a reply. And here is part of what he said. Well, here's his whole post, but again, there are multiple posts, and I'm going to show either several or all of them if they show up in the right sequence, but here we go. So, responding further, Jeff writes, "Thanks for engaging me, Greg. I, too, would like to know if any Trinitarians have addressed Martin's use of Pliny. At the same time, I don't see Trinitarian scholars, I'm talking about the academic types, looking at the blogs of Joe Smiths." I'm Joe Smith. "And therefore I wouldn't expect the Trinitarian scholars to correct the Joe Smiths." Me. Now, the scholars may use Martin's work and skip right over that reference, not address the error. I don't see that as a problem. Really? You don't see that as a problem, Jeff? The scholars may use Martin's work and skip right over that reference, not address the error. I don't see that as a problem. Maybe they should pay closer attention to the Joe Smiths of the world, Jeff. It's a problem. They don't need to correct every misuse of someone's work, especially if they are not using that part of the work in research. Well, let's think about that for just a moment, Jeff. No one ever said you have to correct every error. So once again, we're not really focused on the specific issue here. You're broadening it out in ways that aren't applicable, because that's not what we're talking about. But people do use Pliny's reference. And from the looks of it, it seems like they're either using Martin's misuse of it with capital G-O-D. I showed just two, and I have more. You can just Google online Pliny's reference to Jesus in his letter to Trajan and look at all the captions that come up. I showed two in my Pliny video where certain apologetic nuts are openly misusing it, either because of what Martin wrote, since he's, at least from what I can see, the most well-known Trinitarian to do so, and his works are very well known, regardless of whether you have them or not. They're very well known, Jeff. Just ask Dr. White. And they've been around for a long time. So where else would these apologetic groups be getting the misrepresentation of Pliny's view from? They're not getting it from me. Right? They didn't go to my blog and get the wrong view. They would have got the correction that you don't think scholars need to make. That's what they would have got from Joe Smith's blog. But they're getting it from somewhere, aren't they? Someone is allowing this to go on. And it's wrong. It's an error. Are we not supposed to correct error? I didn't say every error, Jeff. But can we get the big ones corrected? Can we get the ones that are like really unique and special and most everybody should or does know about them? At least enough people to have read them so that people could have said, if they really cared about them, this is not correct. This is error here. Now, why would a Trinitarian scholar or apologist, or all of them to this point, I guess, since neither you nor me can find anyone who's said, hey, this is we shouldn't do this. Doesn't matter about the Trinity. That's not what Pliny thought. It can't be correct. Put it back to a God like Lightfoot. Right? I mean, why is that such a difficult thing to ask? When it's a well-known reference, it's right after the New Testament was written. I know why. Because it doesn't agree with your view. That's the only reason I can come up with, Jeff. This is not an obscure work. This is not an obscure work. It doesn't matter if you've read it or not. You're not supposed to have read everything. But other Trinitarian scholars, I guarantee you Dr. White knows about these books. I guarantee it. I mean, I would be shocked. Same with Bowman. Same with probably most scholars. These are very well-known references. The reference to Pliny is very well-known. The only thing I can come up with, Jeff, is that the Trinitarians don't like the way a God sounds as much as God. Doesn't look like Martin really liked that quote from Lightfoot as much, because then he went right on and changed it. And It seems like people are following him more. Although Jeff does link here, this is the paper where he cited a paper that quoted it correct. So I've never said all Trinitarians misquote Pliny. So Jeff goes on, but again, I too would like to know if any scholars or laymen have corrected it. If not, I just don't see it as troubling as you see it, for the very reason I mentioned here. And then he says, see, for example, this reference. Well, I find it troubling, Jeff. I think that would be troubling to you. Let me put it this way, Jeff. If the Watchtower Society misquoted Pliny, and the context of Pliny's letter was clearly he was referring to God, capital G-O-D, in a Trinitarian sense, and the Watchtower Society misquoted it and instead used a God. Maybe they quote it correct first, like Martin did, and then they misquote it after that. Not once, but at least twice. Would you find that troubling? Are you going to tell me you wouldn't find that troubling? I don't believe you. If you say so, I'm sorry. You're a nice guy. I just don't believe you. If you think you can tell me with a straight face, you would not have a problem with the Watchtower Society misquoting an ancient source about the early view of Jesus that you could show contextually couldn't possibly be the way they're using it. I think you would freak out, and you'd have a good basis for doing so. By freak out, of course, I mean you would do what I did, right? You'd write something or say something. You'd tell someone that you think is following the Watchtower's view of Jesus and say, well, wait a minute. No, you guys did this wrong. You know, you guys think you're being you're directed by God. You're God's organization. You did this wrong. How could you be God's organization? I'm pretty sure there'd be something like that, Jeff. Come on. So, yet, when you guys do it, all of a sudden, you don't see it as very troubling. I find that troubling. And so the first part of my follow-up response to Jeff, you can see it below. Thank you, Jeff. As I explained in the video, Martin does quote Lightfoot correctly in citing Pliny, which is what your reference is summarizing. Right? So I'm pointing out here what I was telling you guys earlier, that I don't believe what Jeff said as far as all Trinitarians misusing Pliny. Here's a fuller quote of the part you just read at the bottom. We'll just read it all again. Thank you, Jeff. As I explained in the video, Martin does quote Lightfoot correctly in citing Pliny, which is what your reference is summarizing. However, and this goes directly to my point, the paper you just linked nowhere corrects Martin's subsequent misuse of Pliny just a couple pages later. So while I give credit to the paper for not repeating Martin's error and for citing Martin's correct citation of Pliny from Lightfoot, the paper still does not represent a correction to Martin's error or the error of others since him, as I showed in the video in Trinitarian Promoting Captions. I have never questioned there are Trinitarians who cite Pliny correctly. Again, right here, I even gave Lightfoot credit and Martin for the first citation of Pliny in Martin's A Hymn. What I am addressing in the video is why did Martin and others misquote and misuse Pliny, all while knowing, even initially quoting Pliny as summarizing the early Christian view of Jesus as a god. Instead, they subsequently cite Pliny as if he supports your belief in Jesus as God. More specifically to my request to you this morning, where is one single Trinitarian, scholar, or layperson who has openly corrected Martin or other Trinitarians' misuse of Pliny? Am I, a non-Trinitarian, the first person ever to do so? If so, I find that very strange, given all the time that has passed and the significance of the reference. All I have found are sources like the one you cite, or like Lightfoot, who merely cite Pliny correctly, but not one Trinitarian source correcting Martin and others' misuse or miscitation of Pliny. Since correcting miscitations and misuses of Pliny are the subject of my video, and since I note both Lightfoot's and Martin's initial citation as correct, again showing that Jeff's initial point in stating that I was claiming that all Trinitarians misuse Pliny is not true. Here's the rest of that citation that was cut off at the bottom. Lightfoot's and Martin's initial citation are correct. Citing others who correctly reference Pliny does not take away from my position. Which is what Jeff tried to do. He tried to highlight an article that did the same thing Lightfoot did, and that Martin started out doing, but then changed it. And my concern is about what? Am I concerned about Lightfoot's correct quotation? Am I concerned about Martin's initially correct quotation of Pliny? No. No one could really think that, right? You watch the video. My concern is what? About the incorrect citation. About the things that are being repeated by people against our view of Jesus that we can show are not correct. And that even this source, if you look at both quotations of Pliny, should suggest is not correct, or that there's an issue at least that needs to be further looked at in light of the context, like we did in the video. Now let's go to Jeff's further response, and just let's make sure. Let's take a look here. Here's what Jeff had to say. Greg, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear in my previous post. I was making the point that just because someone uses Martin as a source, like the article he linked to, doesn't mean they are going to correct every error they have found or not found. Obviously, they can't correct something they don't see. They don't see. How can you not see it? If you're reading Martin's introduction, he quotes Pliny twice. One from Lightfoot correctly, and then on his own incorrectly. So while I agree with you, maybe not our job to correct every single error, this is a big one. Jeff, the name of his book is titled after the reference to Pliny. So if you're reading Martin's book that's titled after the reference in Pliny, Sing Hymns to Christ as to a God, and you quote the correct citation from Lightfoot in Martin's introduction in your paper, you either didn't read the whole introduction, right? Or the person who wrote that paper did read the whole introduction. We assume they did. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt here. And notice both. but didn't see it. And I did. And, did I just get lucky? I mean, it's kind of obvious, Jeff. There's a big difference between a God and God. You Trinitarians remind us of that all the time. So the idea that somehow you couldn't see that, I find a little unusual. I think you're going too far to try to accommodate them and the Trinitarian failure to this point to point out the mistake. Well, let's go back and see what else Jeff had to say. Given the nature of the particular article and outline I referenced, I wouldn't expect Irons to address the error that you have found. My assumption is that the book reviews would be the best place to look. But even with that, and I'm not trying to make excuses, yes, you are. Something like what you've addressed in your video may still go unnoticed. How's that not an excuse? That's exactly what that is. And it doesn't make any sense. Fine. I guess we're not talking about just one person, Jeff. It's like, how many Trinitarians have been around the last 50 years? At least since Martin has been misquoting Pliny. From Kyrios Christos forward, or from the Hymn of Christ book. I don't see how that could go unnoticed all this time, and Trinitarian apologetic groups, like the two at least that I referenced in my Pliny video, are somehow only able to see the misuse of Pliny. They don't see Lightfoot's correct use. They don't see Martin's correct citation of Lightfoot. They don't see the papers like the one you linked. They just see the misuse in Martin and in his writings and anywhere else. That's not that's not going to fly, Jeff. Okay? And if it does, then I expect you what? You're going to argue like this for the Watchtower from now on, right? Or from now on, at least you're going to give the non-Trinitarians who make this kind of similar mistake for this long, right? And your side is the scholars, Jeff. You are on the side of the academics, okay? We all know that, right? You guys definitely have the lion's share of the scholars and theologians and the people who seem to care about these very issues, right? And even titling their books after the very text we're referring to. I just don't think you're going to be as charitable to people who have far less academic representation. You're willing to give a pass to your side with all of that learning and awareness. I mean, I would expect you're pretty much never going to criticize us again then, right? Well, at least not for a mistake like this, right? We get pretty much a free pass from here forward, is what I'm reading from you, Jeff. I appreciate that you're trying to make your side look better here. I get it. It would make you look a lot better if you would just get it and correct yourselves. Like if we could just get you guys to start admitting you've misused Pliny, not all the time, but a lot of the time, I would expect you to at least contact your fellow apologetic nuts, at least the two I referenced in that video, if not all of them, and say, hey, everybody, we need to stop this. It's not correct on its own, and Stafford is making a lot out of this. So let's do ourselves a favor and correct this. Why is that such a problem? It seems like that should be something you would be eager to accomplish. Not make excuse after excuse, just so you can claim that this is like normal, when really it's not, right? It's okay to miss things here or there, but again, your side is not unaware. You have these texts. You guys study them all the time. You translate them, you cite them. So really, any miscitation, given the context of Pliny's letter to Trajan, it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable for an apologetic nut group, like I showed in that video, to caption Pliny's reference incorrectly a la Martin and attach that to Nicaea and say, we go all the way back. This isn't a Nicene doctrine. This is way back. Pliny, Trajan, God, early Christians. It just doesn't make sense, Jeff. It doesn't make sense why you're not correcting people and why you're making so many excuses for their mistakes in this way. Yes, we all make mistakes. Yes, okay. Can you stop making the mistake now? Can you guys fix this, please? That'd be great. That'd be really helpful to us so we could talk about things more openly and not have to constantly correct your side about this issue involving the Trinity. We all have biases, particular purposes, etc. Well, it depends on what you mean by biases, Jeff, but fine. That may cloud our judgment on something. Right or wrong, that's not the issue. It's just the way it is. Just the way it is, huh? Okay, Jeff. So once again, I would expect, given this kind of massaging of the issue, I mean, if I ever hear or see you being overly critical about a mistake I make or the Watchtower makes, I'm going to remind you of all of this. And we'll see how you feel. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a commentary looking for something particular about a text, and the author doesn't address it. Happens all the time. I might think, I can't believe they skipped over this. But that just goes to show they were not asking the question I was asking. So, what you're saying, Jeff, is that a source that doesn't address an issue that we want them to address shouldn't be criticized for not doing so. That doesn't mean we can't criticize them for misquoting a text. That's totally different, Jeff. It's totally different to say, this source doesn't address this, so who cares, right? I just can't talk about everything. Than to say, the citation in this source is wrong. It's misquoted. That's not what that source could have possibly meant contextually. So, I don't understand why you're captioning the argument as if it just is something that's not discussed, when what we're talking about is an obvious and repeated error. Let's go further and get to another part of Jeff's response here. Ignorant Trinitarians won't even double check your sources, etc. The double checking sources thing might be correct here, but I wonder how many people are just taking your word for it that Martin has misused Pliny. Well, we know you are. We know you took my word for it, and you didn't have to. You could have easily just checked on your own, or called Dr. White, or anybody, really, right? I mean, you're not unconnected, Jeff. And you're not unable on your own to check what I'm saying. You just didn't. But you came here and talked about it anyway. And that's troubling. Surely you can see that that's not proper etiquette. That's not the right way. Back to what he said. I would be interested to know if Rhodes Walter Martin, Bowman, White, etc., the apologists, i.e., not the Joe Smiths, have used Martin's misuse of Pliny? If not, surely that must mean something. You may want to see them correct the error of Martin, and I would as well, but if they don't use Martin in that area, they may think that he is not a reliable source at that point. Charity towards others is not a bad thing. I think that's what you mean on your website where it says that you follow the golden rule. This will need to be my last response for now. I need to move on. Okay. The golden rule, Jeff? Treat others the way you want to be treated. Do you want others to repeat error, Jeff? Right, so regardless of whether Walter Martin, Ron Rhodes, Bowman, White use Martin, and I'm here to tell you they all probably know about Martin and certainly about Pliny's reference, but either way, is it not in following the golden rule that you want to treat others the way you want to be treated? And so whether or not you use Martin, since I pointed it out to you and to all of these people 10 years ago in a direct, open response naming Dr. White, right? One of your associates, Jeff, how could it not have come up? Are you guys just, you're basically proving what I've been saying. You guys have been ignoring my stuff. Or you haven't ignored it, and you knew about this, and you just didn't do anything about it. Right? So this argument, this excuse that you're making here, that they just don't use Martin's work, right? If they don't use Martin in that area, they may think he's not a reliable source. Well, Jeff, I pointed this out to show what I'm talking about when it comes to the assumptions of Trinitarianism. It's a big deal, Jeff. Martin's misuse of Pliny and others' misuse of Pliny, right? I pointed out several more recent apologetic captions online heralding a mistranslation of Pliny to try to prove your doctrine, when the correct citation is actually more like ours in the Sons of God sense, but certainly in the A God sense, it would be more like what we're talking about. So I don't know what you're talking about. Charity towards others is not a bad thing. I agree. Can you be charitable towards me, Jeff, and actually read what I wrote 10 years ago? Or talk to Dr. White and say, hey, is this correct or not? I'm going to go over on Greg's page. You know, we've let this go for a long time, but I'm going to throw myself in the discussion now. I haven't read it. I'm not familiar with this stuff, but I'm going to throw myself into it anyway. Right? And Stafford's saying this is an error on our part. He's saying we're misusing this stuff, this like early reference to Christian view of Jesus. I would think the golden rule would motivate you to treat me the way you want to be treated, so that if there was an error in my stuff, or in the Watchtowers, or in any non-Trinitarian stuff that I'm using, or that I would be friendly toward, that you would expect me to also find out if that's what's going on. And you know what, Jeff? That's what I do. That's why I brought this up to you and everybody else a long time ago. And yet what you're telling me is that because I'm Joe Smith, right, I'm just some dummy, you know, any importance, that's what you're saying? Right? Regardless of the fact that Dr. White must have thought I was at least something. He debated me. So did Bowman. So did Dr. Morey. You're on my page. And it just doesn't matter, right? Who cares? It's just Greg. It just says it's just Greg on his blog again. It's incredible. Let's go back to it. So there's another citation where Jeff talks about me, boasting about it. basically saying, it took me to correct this, Jeff. Remember when I read that earlier? But what was I saying there, right? I was basically saying, look, where's the correction? Where's you guys taking care of your own problems so that they're not our problems? Because you keep making them our problems, and when they're not our problem, they're your problem. What's going on here, Jeff? He tried to then suggest I was like boasting, like I'm so special, right? He's downplaying me as Joe Smith, no one special. And yet then he looks at me and says, oh, you're making yourself out to be special. You're boasting. It took you to correct this. Well, you know what, Jeff? If I have to boast, I will boast in the things having to do with God. And this has directly to do with God and the correct view of God that you're not correct in presenting. You didn't even look it up. You didn't even check to see if I was using it correctly. Yeah, I'll boast about that, Jeff. I'll boast in God. I'll boast in the truth about God. The correct view of God. What's wrong with that? I'm not boasting in me. I just looked at it and said, oh, look at that. They're not using it correctly. I'm just a Joe Smith of the world. And even I can see that. Surely all of these scholars and theologians who are a lot smarter than me, they can see that. Right? They'll see, they'll correct that. I'll point this out. I'll show Dr. White. No, I'm not assuming Trinitarianism, James, like I told you in the debate, and here's another example. Pliny, you guys, okay, you're going to correct that now, great. That'd be great. Correct view of God, early Christian view. Great. No, apparently it's not that great, right? That's me boasting. Me trying to get the Trinitarians to correct themselves, which is really not in dispute here. This is kind of a unique example where we don't have really much of an issue in terms of what is meant. The issue is you guys misrepresent it. All of you know, but most of you seem to be, at least at this point, because that's what we keep finding. It's been in Martin's books for at least 50 years, and it's online. Trinitarian apologists are promoting the incorrect view of Pliny about the early Christians and Jesus. So how is that boasting, Jeff? I mean, it seems more like you trying to downplay me helping you. Maybe I actually found something here, Jeff. Maybe if you took the time to read what you didn't take the time to read, you would see Greg is correct. Greg's not boasting. Greg's just trying to get us not to look so incorrect. Greg's trying to get us to have a correct view of Pliny in his report of the early Christian view of Jesus. Instead, you criticize me and make it like a personal thing, like I'm just trying to toot my own horn. That's incredible. So, let me show you the rest of that citation. Here's where it left off, where I was talking to Jeff. So as you can see down here, I'm not boasting about Jeff. I'm emphasizing that I highlighted this in my video, which you are challenging, right? You're coming to my page and challenging me on that video about Pliny, and now I'm boasting because I'm pointing out to you that no one on your side that I can find, and apparently neither can you, corrects yourselves, corrects your own side. Right? It took me. Really? I mean, I'm actually what I was stating earlier was I was kind of being incredulous. I couldn't believe it took a Joe Smith to do what none of your scholars and theologians either could do or would do. And I'm not sure which one is worse. Probably the would do if they wouldn't do it and they knew it. But if they couldn't do it, how much does that say for their scholarship? Either one's not a good look, Jeff. It's not me boasting. It's me emphasizing that I highlighted this in my video, that you are challenging, since you cannot cite from me one single other person who has pointed out Martin's and others' error in citing Pliny. How could the paper you cite notice the first citation in Martin's introduction? Let me bring up the second part of that here. The correct one, but not the second. The incorrect one in the same intro. Are you saying the writer of the paper you cite did not read the whole intro? So, if the writer did read the whole intro, why did your paper only note the right one and fail to correct Martin on the incorrect one? That doesn't make any sense, Jeff. I appreciate that the paper you linked, like Lightfoot, does quote it correct, but you're just going to leave the error in there? That's what I'm talking about. You're leaving in error. That's a big deal. All that the writer of that paper you linked, or anybody else, I would think, had to do was just say, Martin, for some reason, then goes on to cite Pliny as using God. But a quick read of the context of the letter shows that's not accurate. So we're going to just use a God, even though Martin goes on to use God for some unexplainable reason. Is not the purpose of papers to discuss, to use, and to correct information about the subject? How is it possible no other Trinitarian you or I can think of, we've both read quite a few, has ever bothered to read the whole intro to one of the most popular books on Christology and failed to notice this? If I am the first one to do so, I find that hard to believe. Does that sound like boasting to you? It doesn't to me. Because I happen to think most, if not all, Trinitarians who have read Martin's whole intro did see both citations, the correct and the incorrect ones. Yet no one has corrected the obvious miscitation until me. Again, incredulity. I'm blown away if this is true. I'd be shocked, actually, right? I mean, I happen to think probably, if we look hard at, I haven't found anything, and I've read a lot of stuff. And if I saw someone correct it, I would have said that. I would have said, okay, this person right here actually did what I believe should be done, corrected Martin. Not even one? How could that be? That's incredible to me. Surely you can see the oddity in this. Surely as well, you can see the problem with the apologetic captions and uses of the incorrect citation of Pliny as misleading. Just like I believe and argue in this video, every use of God by Trinitarians is misleading where it concerns the NT. But let's just deal with Pliny. Again, I challenge you to find me one single Trinitarian who has openly corrected Martin or any other Trinitarian who miscites Pliny. If you cannot find an example of this, then yes, perhaps I should be given just a tiny bit of credit for doing so. I don't think that's too much to ask, Jeff. it seems like you're making me out to be the bad guy for correcting something your side is responsible for. That's not fair. And that's actually disrespectful. You should be thanking me. Additionally, I cannot find one Trinitarian who did what I did. You could very well be the first. So now we both get credit for what it's worth. And I happen to think it's worth something. Hence the video. Talk to you later. And so, I don't know what else to say about this matter regarding Pliny and his letter to Trajan and Jeff and other Trinitarians having such a hard time coming to grips with their side making this kind of error. This is a big one, Jeff. This is God or a God stuff, Jeff. This is an early non-Christian talking about early Christians, which you and I claim to be Christians. Where does this rank on the level of importance to you? I guess not very high, according to what we read, right? And yet, this is high ranking, Jeff. This is a big deal. You're doing a good job downplaying it because it's your side that blew this big deal. And then you make me out to be the bad guy because I'm actually promoting the correct view. Doesn't make any sense at all. You should not have come to my page and talked about this. You didn't even read the materials. You don't really understand the issues. And you didn't represent what I even said in the video correctly. So I had to spend all this time with you. I could have been with my kids. I could have been teaching the truth about job. I could have been working and making a little more money. I could have been doing my schoolwork harder. You could have been taking care of your church. You could have been taking care of your family. This was not the time or the way to do this, Jeff. And all it did was create more doubt as to whether or not we can get you guys to admit anything. Are you ever just going to come out and say we were wrong? We made a huge mistake here. This is a big one here. Yeah, we got this view wrong here. There was no reason for this error to be here, let alone be perpetrated throughout reprints in popular Christology books and then captioned on apologetic group sites or flyers or tracts. Yeah, maybe you guys could just come out and admit an error for once, Jeff. Is that so bad? I mean, is your view, it looks like your view of yourselves is so high, us Joe Smiths of the world can't tell you anything. So why even try? You know, why even spend the time? And that's why I'm moving on pretty soon, at least for a while, from this kind of stuff. And I'm not going to engage you anymore on my Facebook page like this. So I'm showing people why. We need to get to the evolution stuff. We need to get to the God existence stuff. We need to get to the flood stuff. We need to prove these things to people who don't already claim to believe and who aren't just going to keep covering up their own error like it's so easy to not see. We don't need to keep spending a bunch of time on things like that, Jeff. Just admit the error. Tell your fellow Trinitarians to stay away from there. And if you don't like the way Pliny represented the early Christian view of Jesus, stop quoting it. Okay, let us have that. Let us have at least one thing. Because it doesn't look like you guys want us to give us anything, right? You're so paranoid and insecure about us ever being right and you being wrong. It's like all of a sudden, if you admit one thing, it's like, oh, the whole world fell apart. Trinitarianism has gone from one error. No, that's not true, Jeff. You can admit an error and still believe in the Trinity. I don't think you should, but I don't think admitting one error, even a really big one, requires you all of a sudden not to believe in the Trinity, or that all of a sudden you don't have any scholars anywhere. We're human beings, Jeff. Human beings make mistakes like you wrote, like you were trying to make excuses for. I get it. Well, where's the correction then? Can we get that part done? Okay, fine. We all make mistakes. We all make errors. Can you correct it? Do I have to keep repeating it? How long do we as non-Trinitarians have to keep dealing with this error, Jeff? Well, at least the Watchtower Society moves on from their errors. Right? They don't keep promoting, for example, 1925. Seems like you're just making all these excuses, and that's just no big deal. No, people don't use. Oh, who cares? Not a big deal. Yeah, it's a big deal, Jeff. It's causing confusion, and it's misleading people. Now, Jeff and I talked about a few other things, so that takes care of the whole Pliny stuff. But Jeff wasn't done. Jeff also wanted to discuss my posting of my own video on my CWJ site, where I wrote about how this video, part 6, Begotten or Created, where we've established very clearly there's no difference in the biblical text, right? There's no eternal generation in the biblical text. Nothing. Not one single text or concept in the Bible supports eternal generation. And yet, we have text after text after text that argues against it. So I pointed that out in this series. I posted this video to show how bankrupt the made-up non-biblical concept of eternal generation is and how it contradicts what the Bible explicitly teaches. So then Jeff came in and said, so you are just going to be dishonest when you say you Trinitarians never present any evidence of any of your Trinitarian concepts, eternal generation, person of God. And then he gives a link here to where, he's referring to me as saying that. Obviously, you don't agree with the doctrine, but you are dishonest when you say it's not presented. Now, you may be speaking in particular to your YouTube channel, and that's fine, but don't be so limited. And then he links this video here, that he wants people to watch for his view. Just one problem, Jeff. In the video that you refer and partially quote, where you only quote part here and you cut it off, and then you only quote part here and you cut it off, I explicitly am referring to the Bible. Biblical evidence, Jeff. I regularly point out, and even in that very video, I believe, certainly in several in the series, I reference, and it, in fact, I'm positive I do in that video, that your explanation for the generation that is explicit in the biblical text is eternal generation. That's how you guys explain what the Bible says. I do say that. But it's not my job to manufacture evidence to support your view. I know that there are people who talk about the view. I'm talking about you not presenting any evidence from the Bible. Does that mean Trinitarians never quote a text and say eternal generation? No. I know you do that. And I talk about it in that video and in many videos where this comes up. It's not explicit in any of the texts you cite. And that's why I say, as you partially quote, you don't present any evidence of your Trinitarian concepts, eternal generation, person of God. The Bible doesn't use the words eternal generation. It does use the word generation. It does use the word only begotten. It does use the word firstborn to mean the beginning or arche of one's children, or of generative power in the Hebrew text. That's the definition in the Bible for firstborn. You know, the term that's applied to Jesus in non-figurative texts, as is arche. Revelation 3:14, the same term used where wisdom says she was created as the beginning, arche, of Jahweh. Created Jeff, katizo Jeff, ganao Jeff. Jahuah created me as the beginning of his way. Jahuah begat me. They're used in parallel sequence, Jeff. Proverbs 8:22-25. I went over this. I talked about other uses of generation in the Bible. Genesis 6:7, and how in the Hebrew it uses bara. And the Greek text, it shows that, well, in terms of how humans are born, we know that they're begotten. Just like in Matthew 1, where it talks about people being begotten in exactly the same way that Jahuah speaks of them as being created. And then it uses the same term for the generation of Jesus inside Mary. No transfer, no change, same term all the way. There's no eternality associated with that. There's creation associated with that, Jeff. That's what I'm talking about. So what are you talking about? You're talking about the Trinity. You're talking about the very things you always talk about, except what is explicitly in the text. You can't do it. You can't point to a text, Jeff, and I'm going to show that you can't because you did try and you didn't. I'm going to show there is no text that teaches eternal generation. And for all of you watching, tomorrow I'm going to upload a video where I'm going to review comments. It's a new video series I'm going to do on reviewing the CW JahTube comments. I'm going to talk about God's house, space and time, and how you guys just don't understand what the Bible teaches. And so you change it with your concepts so that you can read it in light of what you think it should teach. We're going to show that too right now in terms of what you proceeded to do. But let me go on with what I responded as far as what you said. Wrong. You were not invited here to post links, Jeff. Do you have a biblical text or not? If not, your link is a joke and it will be deleted and you will be blocked. One chance. Do you have a text in the Bible teaching what you claim the link tells us? I know you don't, so let's see if you can prove me wrong. This is chance right here, right? It's like, you have this is the perfect opportunity, and I always give people that opportunity. It's always there, right? Where's the text? You guys dance around things and argue in ways that are just totally outside of these texts. And here I'm asking Jeff, where is the biblical support, Jeff? Where is this concept that you're using to transform the otherwise regularly temporal meanings of all these terms, whether it's figurative or not? Right? It's still temporal. We'll get to an example that you provide in a moment. There's no example in the Bible that has been provided to date to support eternal generation. That's the whole thing I've been talking about. That's the whole point of the debate. So again, there's nothing to debate because you don't present anything. Although Jeff did come back, he did try. I'm not saying, this doesn't have anything to do with not trying to use a text. It's about whether or not the text you use says what you claim. Right? Because, for example, before Jeff wrote back, as you saw, I challenged him to provide a biblical text, right? I gave him a chance. It's your chance. Prove me wrong, Jeff. I spent all this time with you on Pliny. You're here now. We're talking about begotten in my video. You're not reading my sources. You're not providing biblical texts. So I'm not going to keep doing it, right? I've already even stated, look, I'm moving on from the Trinity. But look at how much time I give these people. It's not just in my videos or on my YouTube channel or all the things I've done before. I spend time on my Facebook page with them as well. So before Jeff wrote back and provided some text, we're going to get to him in a moment. At this point, I've had it, right? I mean, you can see where this could just reach a point where, look, I'm repeating myself in ways where you should already know this stuff, and yet you don't. So I wrote back before Jeff wrote back with his text that we'll get to next. Amazing, in fact, that your doctrine is so bankrupt, you don't even have one single text. We have text, Proverbs 8:22-25. Jehovah created me, katizo. Jehovah begat me, ganao. As the arche of his way, earliest of his achievements of long ago. After text, Deuteronomy 21:17, Colossians 1:15, the definition of firstborn and the application of it in a literal context. Clearly temporal in both texts. After text, John 1:18, only begotten God. Again, only begotten, monogenes. There's nothing eternal about monogenes. It's a temporal term. Okay, you can argue that it's applied in a figurative sense somewhere outside the Bible, or you could try to say that it's applied to Isaac, but Abraham had other children, but yet we know he only had one with Sarah. And we know that it's still temporal there. It's not applied to an eternal being, Jeff. It's never applied to the Father. It's applied to the Son and to sons with temporality. There's no eternality with monogenes, Jeff. After text, John 5:26, the Father granted the Son to have life in himself, which the Father already had. Yeah, whatever you think about life, that's different. That's one having it and the other one getting it from the one who has it. That's what a father does. Okay, so the burden isn't on us when we're just accepting the text as they're read. The burden's on you, Jeff, to show that this clear separation in terms of one having life, the Father, and the other one receiving life, the Son, doesn't involve temporality. That's on you, Jeff. Okay, we get to cite the text and just let it read. Because we don't have to do anything else. We just read. You can't do that. After text, Hebrews 1:3, right? There's character of his being as like one of the most explicit temporal uses of a term you're going to find. They all are, but character, there's never a use of character that isn't temporal in light of the thing it's made a copy of. That's the whole point. You Trinitarians, man. 5 separate text groupings showing our explicit non-eternal generation view. You have nothing. Not one text. So you are dishonest. Remember, that's what he called me? He said I was being dishonest. You said I was being dishonest, Jeff, because I said you don't present any evidence from the Bible. I never claimed you don't talk about your concepts or cite your later views as evidence. That's just assuming the very thing we're asking you to prove. You called me dishonest for that. That's not true. I think my reference to you as dishonest in this context is more correct. And I'm just being honest because you're not giving me texts. You're misrepresenting what I say. And you're ignoring these texts and their temporality and not providing me any eternality in response. You send people away from the Bible with no texts because that's all you can do. Disagree? Show me. Here's your chance, buddy. Otherwise, we all know you are dishonest and don't believe the Bible. Hence, you can't show us your belief in the Bible. We're not interested in your or anyone else's extended non-biblical commentary. Texts, please. And then I go on, I followed up a couple more times. Because Jeff initially came and he posted a link to a video that, again, doesn't provide explicit biblical texts that state their view like we do. I deleted that because I didn't ask him to come here and post links to other videos. He just did it on his own. So I initially said, no, you're not invited here for that. You're either going to present biblical information or we're not just going to go watching your stuff. This is a CW job page. I don't do that to you. But then Jeff came back within like 30 minutes and reposted it. So it didn't take him long to do that. Took you less than 30 minutes to repost a link that doesn't belong here because it has nothing to do with the Bible. Let's see how long it takes you to cite one single text showing us your view in the Bible. Waiting. So I was really pushing him here, right? I want it. I want the information. Show me the texts. Show me eternal generation. Because I've shown you texts. And there's no eternal generation. There's clear temporality. Claiming I meant you, non-biblical Christians, never talk about eternal generation is a lie. I regularly state that is your only way out of the explicit text I just cited. So please stop lying to people. What I stated, Jeff, is you have no biblical evidence. Now that you are here, where is it? If you don't provide it now, you don't have it. Or are you just hiding biblical text from us? See how easy it was for me to just cite text that you only need to read? You can't do it, Jeff. Sorry. Here's the text right here, right? This is easy stuff. This is for us. It's like quoting Pliny. We don't have to do any of that weird stuff, change terms. They're doing that to us. And then justifying their obvious errors. Or at least trying to. Instead of just admitting it and getting on to the other things so we don't have all these ongoing issues. We're not making any progress, Jeff. We're not making any progress when we do things like this. All right, now let's get to Jeff's text. Are you guys curious to see what Jeff would cite after me pressing him? All right, give me the eternal. I'm dishonest, according to Jeff, because I don't present the Trinitarian side, which is not true. I challenged Jeff to present his text, right? Give me the explicit view. I gave you 5 groupings right there. Boom, boom, boom. And that's just, I could do a lot more. Let's get to Jeff's text evidence. Here you go. All right, so here you can see this is the last one we read right here. And here's Jeff's response. Right after I told him, man, it took you 30 minutes to repost that link to a video. Let's see how long it takes you to cite one single text showing us your view in the Bible. Here it is. There's Jeff's evidence. Take a look. John 1:14, John 3:16, Hebrews 1:5, etc. Etc. does not qualify, Jeff. That's why I didn't use it. I just, wrote the texts. So we'll just set aside your etc. We'll assume after being challenged like that, you're giving us, at least some of your best texts, right? I mean, it shouldn't be that hard for such an important view that you consider us heretics over. and that you use to override the obvious temporality involved in the text that I cite. Greg, you're missing the point I'm making. I know we'll disagree on these matters. I'm not going to change your mind, nor will you change mine. Well, it sounds like a closed mind, but let's move on. But to say these things are not discussed, laid out, is simply not true. I never said that. That's what you do. You say that I say things I don't say when there are no texts that state your view, Jeff. What am I supposed to do? Present texts that don't exist and say, well, this is their view of eternal generation right here. I don't know, Jeff. That's just not how it works. So when, for example, I say I have an explicit view of God, one God the Father, I can go to the text and, that's exactly what it says. 1 Corinthians 8:6, one God the Father. When I say Jesus is a copy of God's being, I can go to Hebrews 1:3 and that's exactly what it says. When I give you two texts like Deuteronomy 21:17 and Colossians 1:15, where one defines the meaning of firstborn and the other text applies the term firstborn, that's it. I don't need you to do anything else than connect the definition to the term being applied to the one we're talking about. Just very straightforward. When you go to Proverbs 8:22 and 25, it's just really clear, it says about wisdom, the one that Jesus identified with in the New Testament, according to his own quotation of text said by wisdom. It just states explicitly that Jah created wisdom, the one who was with him before all things were made, just like John 1:1 states about the Word, the one that Jesus is also said to be, Revelation 19:13. You just read it. Compare it with verse 25. And what do you know? They're used in parallel sequence. Same thing. No eternal generation there, Jeff. So I don't have to add anything. You do. And that's the problem we have with your view. In fact, they are discussed quite a bit, especially as of late in Trinitarian scholarship. By the way, I don't have a problem referring to non-biblical commentary, neither do you. I don't know why you think taking the high road on such a thing. One can quote verse after verse. We need to know what it means, not just what it says. Well, the thing is, Jeff, the texts I'm citing, quoting to you, they mean what they say. No, you don't have to add anything. Yeah, there's commentaries that we can read and gain more information about the background and sometimes the meaning of terms that aren't as clear. But that's not what we have here. I mean, you almost make it seem like we can't quote any verse without finding out extendedly what other people have to say. That makes no sense at all for people who accept the texts the way they're written when there's no controversy at all in how to translate them or the terms being applied, which is the case here. The only reason you don't accept them as they're stated is because you don't accept them as they're stated. We do. There's no problem with that view. There's not a problem viewing Jesus as God's real firstborn. He has other sons, Job 38:7. He's the firstborn one. What's the problem? Why is that all of a sudden so complicated we got to run to the commentaries or to the creeds and figure out what's going on here? What does firstborn mean? Oh, it's defined in Deuteronomy 21:17. We don't need to run to the commentaries and later creeds. Oh, great. So, Jeff, I just don't really understand your extended comments here. But let's take a look at the text Jeff cited and see if they teach what he believes. Let's go to the Bible Hub. John 1:14. New International Version. Word became flesh, made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. One and only Son here, of course, is not a good translation. It does not represent the generative aspect of monogenes. It basically just misrepresents the Bible, right? I just pointed out, as anyone who's familiar with the Bible should already know about, that Job 38:7 and many other texts, Genesis 6, speak of the sons of God who were there when God made everything, just like the Word, just like the Son of God. So the NIV here, as I'll explain in more detail in my forthcoming series on the New World Translation, is incorrect. Jesus is not God's one and only Son. But there's no eternality here, Jeff. Just like every other son that the Bible talks about, sons come from their father. They're generated from their father, just like in Matthew 1. There's nothing here in any way that even hints at eternality, and that, in fact, explicitly supports our view, like the other texts I cited, that there's temporality involved in the relationship between the Son and the Father. That is more obvious than anything, because there's nothing else that qualifies the relationship. English Standard Version, glory as of the only Son from a Father. Again, a generative aspect of monogenes is lacking. King James Bible, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father. That's more correct. That's temporality, Jeff. Where are you getting eternality here? Because it's not there. New King James, same thing, pretty much. New American Standard, glory as of the only Son from a Father. Again, incorrect, does not represent the generative aspect, and just is conceptually wrong in terms of the Bible. NASB 1995 is more correct, only begotten from the Father, as is the in 1977. So, Jeff, that's a no. That's a no on John 1:14, and we get to put that in our category, Jeff. So, nice try. But that belongs on our side as evidence of temporality associated with Jesus and his relationship with the Father, just like is the case with every only begotten from the Father. And so, it just goes to further show, you guys don't have anything, Jeff. I was right, and you were wrong in calling me dishonest when I said you don't have anything that shows your view. Let's take a look at your next text. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. Again, mistranslation in the New International Version, failing to capture the generative aspect of monogenes, and misrepresenting the biblical text, which explicitly teaches in numerous texts, God has other sons. English Standard, God so loved the world, he gave his only Son. Again, not correct. Fails to capture the generative aspect. King James Bible, God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. How about that? One of the older Bibles, more correct than these newer Bibles. Incredible. I wonder why that's the case. New King James, same thing, more correct than the New International. New American Standard, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. Again, incorrect. Fails to capture the generative aspect, but no eternality. Right? Just because the NIV and the NASB and the English Standard are using one and only or only, there's no eternality there, Jeff. And they're just failing to present the generative aspect that indicates temporality in the relationship between the Son and the Father, which is how we normally associate fathers and sons. And in the other editions of the NASB, we get only begotten, only begotten. So, once again, we get to put this text on our list, Jeff. So far, in response to my challenge, in response to your claiming I'm dishonest for not presenting your evidence, you've presented evidence that shows I'm honest and that what I'm teaching is correct and what you're teaching is not. Now, let's go to your last text. Hebrews 1:5. New International. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son. Today I have become your father"? Or again, "I will be his father, and he will be my son"? English Standard. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son. Today I have begotten you"? Or again, "I will be to him a father, and he shall be a son to me a son." King James. For unto which of the angels said he at any time, "Thou art my son. This day I have begotten thee"? New American Standard. "You are my son. Today I have fathered you." NASB 1995. "I have begotten you." 1977. "Begotten thee." All right, Jeff. So none of these texts are talking about eternality. They're talking about the Father, quoting from the Psalms, just as he did with David. And I talked about this in my videos on the series of Begotten and Created. You might want to watch those. It's talking about David in the Psalms being installed as king. Just like it is right here in Hebrews 1:5. Because who became lower than the angels? Jesus. Right? So what is being applied here is not being applied to an angel, right? Because he became, as Hebrews 2 goes on to say. I did a whole series on this, by the way, folks. Look at my playlist on the Bible and the Trinity and conflict. I talk about it. I explicitly deal with this text and everything it involves. But as far as Jeff's use of it here, let's just go over it again. It's talking about Jesus after he died, faithful. You could read Hebrews 1:4. Being begotten as king at God's right hand, and then being put on his throne. Hebrews 1:8, quoting Psalm 45, God is your throne. I went over it all. Even did a separate translation video on Hebrews 1:8. There's temporality here, Jeff. Just because it's not talking about a literal birth, right? It's not talking about David being born, literally. It's talking about him figuratively being born as the king. Just like it's talking about the Son figuratively being born as king. That's temporality, Jeff. Temporality means there's time involved. It happened at a point in time, Jeff. There's no eternality here. There's all temporality in every single text Jeff cited. And he only cited 3, and I guess couldn't think of anything else. Oh well. All 3 of these texts agree with me and what I teach, which Jeff said was dishonest. And yet his group and what they teach is honest? Doesn't look like that with your group's handling of Pliny, Jeff. Doesn't look like that with your desire to correct obvious error that I pointed out, Jeff. It doesn't look like you really have anything. And isn't that what I've been saying, everyone? I've not been exaggerating. I'm not just putting these videos up with titles like The End of Trinitarianism to get people's attention and shock. No. No. We're done. And it's being continuously proven over and over again. I give them opportunities. I let them comment on my videos. I interact with them. I do more videos. I let them comment on my page. I challenge them to show me things, even though they call me dishonest because of those things. All while they're trying to protect their image and cover up their errors and make excuse after excuse. And that's what they were, Jeff, for their error, when we all know they would never be that charitable to us if we made that kind of error. So here we are, Jeff. I've taken the time to respond to you. I've taken the time to correct you. I've taken the time to review the text that you cited to me in response to my challenge to you to defend your doctrine related to the Trinity. And it's not there. And what is there is what we teach. Just like in Pliny. The truth is what we teach, Jeff. It's not dishonesty. You may not agree. I understand. But to call people dishonest when it's not dishonesty, it's actually the height of honesty. We're just reading the text. We're just trying to quote it correct, not change it so it fits our view of God and makes it seem like someone who couldn't have possibly known about that view of God spoke about that God, that Trinity that you believe in. That's not the case with Pliny. It's not the case with John, and it's not the case with Hebrews. It's not the case with any of these texts, Jeff. And that's exactly what I said in the video. So you might want to watch it again before you comment on my page or anywhere else. You might want to actually take a look at these texts, Jeff. And if you really want to help us and you and everybody out, stop quoting texts as if they promote a view they do not, and correct yourself. You'll save all of us a bunch of time. We'll have a healthier mind. And then just maybe we can talk about things another time more openly, honestly, and apart from later doctrines like the Trinity.